we are rolling here. Let me just make a note here. All right. Okay. All right. All right. Are you ready to gavel this to order, Ben Wahlund?
I certainly am.
Let's do it. Gavelled. So gavelled. All right, Ben Wahlund, thank you so much for joining me today. I want to first apologize. We were sort of 30 seconds ago lamenting that we don't actually know each other personally, other than sort of like maybe smelling each other's cologne as we walked past each other in basic, but like that's as close as we know each other. But I've known of you as, I think I first ran across you as an arranger of a steel drum piece, and to be quite honest, I don't remember which piece it was, but I came across your name in the steel band world.
Oh my.
Whether or not that is what you intended, that's how it happened. And but honestly, Ben, that's kind of all I know about you. And these podcasts are for me kind of the most enjoyable, where I get to, I love talking with old friends, but I love sort of chewing the fat with somebody I don't know. And so after this hour or so, like, we can go wherever we want to go, but I'm kind of curious for you, Ben, before we get rolling here, we can go on a million tangents, but we've never met and we've never heard of each other, but like, what do I need to know about baby Ben Wahlund and like why you got into doing the things that you're doing? I'm assuming you didn't start arranging steel drum stuff out of the womb. But could you sort of like give me the nickel and dime tour of Ben Wahlund, and then we'll go wherever after that.
Sure, I'll try to keep it to 2 minutes or so.
Use three if you're feeling generous. It's all
That
right.
sounds great. My brother and I grew up in a very musical household. My dad was a band director in the Army, and my mom was a music educator. In fact, both my parents met in college when they were music majors at Valley City State University in Valley City, North Dakota. And my dad joined the military and had roughly a 15-year run directing bands, and was stationed in Korea and Japan and Germany, Maryland and Texas. And
Ben, I've already interrupted you, so this is the worst podcast ever. But
oh, no worries.
I just have a ton of questions. So like you're. Pardon my ignorance of the way the military band system works. I've given one masterclass to the West Point group when they were playing Xenakis years ago with me and Eric, and it was hilarious because I was like, "Hey, you're coming in late," and everybody in the ensemble was like, "No, don't say that to him." And I was like, "Why?" They're like, "Because he's a staff sergeant." I was like, "I don't give a fuck. He's coming in late. Like that's what's happening."
Sure.
It's like, but nobody in the ensemble could actually tell him that because of the way the hierarchy worked. And so Eric and I were just there like, all right, I don't care what any of you are ranked. You're either coming in right or you're not. And they were sort of like, oh, thank God, somebody's just calling balls and strikes. Like, what for your dad? For your dad, like, what was his primary when he entered the military? Was his primary goal was to deal with band stuff, or was it like what was his job like? Like, why did he end up doing that?
So my dad's rank was a chief warrant officer. He was the full-on director of bands. So he was the guy with the baton on the podium. And when he retired, he was a CW4. He was originally a trumpet.
I don't know what that is. You could have just said any letters and a number, and I'd have been like, "Cool, sounds great."
Oh, sure.
He's an XY 7.5, like
Well, so his job was to run the bands. He would run rehearsals. He would organize their outings. So, like when he was stationed in Ansbach, Germany, where our family lived, we lived technically in a smaller town nearby, but it was his job to organize the trips, like during Oktoberfest, to local beer tents and stuff like that. And then the band in general would play as just kind of guest bands. So,
and you were how old at this time?
Oh gosh, I was 6, 7, and 8.
And again, like when I was 6, I was in Dover, Ohio, and listen, I put my ashes there. I'm fine with it, but like, I'm curious as a 6-year-old, like, was Germany like? Were you asking your dad like, "Yo, Dad, this is cool, but like, my friends at home are watching NFL," and like, what was it like for you as a kid in Germany?
Well, there's something really you're hitting on something that I've gone back to a number of times, because like the town we lived in was celebrating its 1,250th year anniversary,
which no American has ever been able to do.
Well, sure, And so it was. We were in Bavaria, which is like that really Franconian, like the black and white diamonds everywhere. You know what I'm saying? And the flags hanging, and there's a big, gorgeous church in every town and things. And yeah, I think both my brother and I sort of took for granted that like a trip to Paris was a weekend trip. You know what I mean? Or like we'd like all of a sudden find ourselves in Nuremberg or like. And my parents,
As a kid, I was
they,
like, I found myself in Canton.
well, yeah, and my
You're like,
parents
oh,
did
I
a
just
great
woke up,
job
I was in
like
Paris.
traveling a bunch, So it was awesome. But
Yeah.
in the early '80s, because I was born in '77, like we had I have memories of like Berlin and East Berlin and West Berlin and seeing the Berlin Wall and things. So like in the height of the Cold War, like we had this big picture that America was this amazing place. And sometimes my dad would go home and visit his parents or visit his family, and he'd come back with things from America. Like we got a Houdini album and like Run DMC, and my brother and I were just sure that like everyone was breakdancing and stuff. So that was our thing, was like Beat Street and break-in and all that. And we were shocked when my dad got stationed in Texas to learn that like, oh no, not all Americans like breakdance.
You're like, there's James Brown, there's like Bob Seger, there's
Well,
Randy
totally.
Newman. There's a whole lot of American music that's happening.
Well, yeah, and you might have caught that my parents were from North Dakota, so like my dad, like we'd be driving around the Alps listening to like Charlie Daniels band and stuff, and like some full like Alabama, and then
Does it ever
Beastie
strike you
Boys.
that you might have been the only person ever to have listened to like Alabama in the Alps?
I guess I never gave it much thought, but I think you're right. Like
a rare club.
yeah, so it was pretty binary. Like it was either Houdini or. Alabama.
Charlie Daniels Band. Sorry, that was the
Yeah.
original. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, and yeah, so it was a trip in large part because we were moving every 2 or 3 years. So my memory of childhood almost always involved going from culture to culture to culture, which at the time was really challenging for a family, of course, but. That's also just what it is to be a military brat, and
But also, I mean, one of the guys in I'm really sorry, Ben, and I'll buy
worries.
you a case of beer for interrupting you a million times. But when I hear, one of the guys in Adam, he moved a lot as a kid. He wasn't a military brat,
Yeah.
to use the term.
It's
Probably,
we say it affectionately,
inappropriately, but he moved a lot, and I remember him talking a lot about like the way he is now, the way he interacts with people, the way he. And again, like I'm misdiagnosing some of Adam's personality here, but like I've known him now for 15 years, and it's like, oh yeah, like the way he sees the world is because he moved from Alpharetta, Georgia to Denver to Boston to like all these other places every 2 or 3 years. Like for you, as a now as a teacher, where you have students underneath you who are like listening to everything you say, hopefully, and like and now you're an adult with a fully formed prefrontal cortex, like. Is there any part of you now that you're like, oh, I am the way I am because, for better or worse, the reality of my parents' livelihood of like, I had to become a different, I had to sell someone on how awesome I was every 2 years. As a kid in Dover, Ohio, I sold someone in kindergarten on how awesome I was, and that investment paid off in high school. I was playing the quad toms and hanging out with like the star quarterback because I knew the quarterback in first grade. But
Yeah.
for you, like, what was that like as a kid growing up? Like, remove all the sort of like, yes, you're a successful teacher and a percussionist and all that stuff, but like, that had to suck on some level.
It really did. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of memories of that sucking. And I can, in a lot of areas of my adulthood, I can absolutely trace a straight line to certain aspects of what it is to have moved around a lot. Yeah, because things that worked in El Paso, Texas, didn't work 3 years later for a middle school kid. And middle school, mind you, is already brutal for kids, right? But then
It's brutal for kids and for parents and for teachers. It's the worst. Like when armpit hair enters the equation, I feel like every kid should just be sent to like, whatever the equivalent of Australia was. Like, let's just send them to an island until all their armpit hair is in, and then they can come back.
No doubt, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I remember like things that were funny in Texas weren't funny in northeastern Pennsylvania, which
Right.
then weren't funny in North Dakota, where my family finally moved when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was constantly trying to recalibrate, what was appropriate socially, and
Mm-hmm.
I was actually kind of thinking, like hangs professionally for me are always a little awkward, just
Mm.
because it's hard to feel comfortable working a room.
Okay, okay,
Um,
okay, but me too.
oh, sure,
And I'm not a military brat, so like this is where like you and I
sure,
have something in common. I After a show, like last night we played at Princeton
yeah.
University. It was the first live show back at Princeton in 2 years.
Well, way to go.
Oh, it was great. It was lovely. But after the show, I was like, I kind of had a moment of it wasn't fear or I don't know how to describe it, but it was like,
Mhm.
I don't want to talk to anybody.
Sure.
I want to wrap cables and I want to get in my Honda
Yeah.
Accord and drive home and listen to podcasts. Like I don't want
Yes.
to, and so for me, it was like that weird sort of like what my job was versus what people think my job is and what I want to do. Like, but for you, like why do we have that in common? I guess is my question.
I'm intrigued by that. Yeah. I mean, I certainly can't speak for you why you feel that way.
Mm,
I know for me, it takes a certain degree of energy, and it's a
mm,
different kind of flavor of energy than what it takes to perform.
yeah.
Um, so I think that's part of it. I certainly enjoy people. In fact, I think I enjoy people so much one on one that when it's like 5 or 6 people, it gets really overwhelming
Mm-hmm,
really
mm-hmm,
fast. And
mm,
and you just see your friend like maybe getting kind of rolled over by some person, and you want to go help them somehow, or you catch that some other conversation somewhere else is going south, and like you feel somehow obligated to uh, to engage everyone in one way or another.
yeah, yeah.
So what I've found is I'm almost always guilty of just kind of just dragging some poor person into a corner and talking all night at a wedding or something like that. Um,
Yeah, I've never been a big like I've always hated like I mean so we get put in these positions all the time where it's like oh
I'm sure.
here's a room where like there's a bunch of donors or the board is here and I'm like I'm sure they're awesome people and I want to absolutely make every one of them feel special but like I just ran naked through the park for all of them for 2 hours. Like what
Totally.
I need to do, what is it okay to tell them that what I need is Real Housewives of Orange County right now? Like I need to go to my hotel room and just like put on blinders and be like trash TV for like 4 hours
Sure.
just to feel like I can recharge my tank. But as a musician, I feel guilty about that. I mean, I genuinely do. I genuinely feel like someone who paid to come see me play deserves the right to ask me a million questions. They have that right, but I also feel like no. I did my job. It's like you came to Walmart and you bought a bunch of stuff. It's not like you get to ask the cashier like how they spend their money all day. Like this is I want to go
And
home. Like but I feel
well,
guilty
and
about it.
well, it certainly doesn't make you an a-hole to set those appropriate boundaries. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, maybe it doesn't make me one to them, but I feel like one. So what I
sure.
feel like is maybe
Well, and
maybe
I
not accurate.
think there are so many conventions around what it is to be a musician, or certainly a
Mm,
successful one, that I think I've spent the better part of my adulthood trying to shed what some of those expectations are.
mm, mm,
I know for me, for instance, I'm a morning person. I don't really get amped about playing at night a bunch. In fact, just performing in general, I mean, I don't have full on anxiety about it or anything. I just enjoy composing more. I enjoy teaching
mm,
more, and I'm happy to throw down when it's time. But like when I daydream music ideas, I'm almost always daydreaming other people doing them. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
No,
like,
I totally,
like,
totally.
hey, it would be really cool if it was a percussion trio and a poet, and then I never really imagined myself being the poet or the percussion trio. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
totally,
and
totally.
yeah, and I'm really grateful that I'm surrounded by all sorts of people who are good to do that. Like they get excited about that. And
Hmm, hmm.
you were asking about what it was to move around a lot as a kid. Um, I have a pretty like understated lifestyle when all is said and done. Like I don't really have a really big appetite for travel.
Hmm, hmm.
Again, like I'm happy to travel when I can, but like if I don't end up going to India before I pass away, it's not going to like really eat me up, you know. In large part because as a kid, you know, I didn't really know what it was to be in a community for 5 or 10 or 15 years, you know. So
Well, that's one of the
so
things. That's one of the things too that like I just want to mark here. Like you were fortunate enough in terms of like I don't want to say privilege. That's not the word to use because just
I
because it
don't
has
mind
a.
calling it that. Yeah, I mean
But it's got a
it was hard.
connotation.
It was
It's
hard for
got
our family, but I'm really grateful for it. Yeah.
there were some benefits I think that like if you're looking at if you're just calling balls and strikes, like your experience I think gave you an awareness of the world that my experience just didn't do until I was about 18 or 19. And
Yeah.
like for me, I think I'm coming at it from the back end, which is like holy shit, culture is relative.
Yeah.
Morality is relative. Whether
Yes.
or not you agree with it, like, I'm sorry, the moralities in the Middle East or the moralities in Ethiopia, and the way the ecosystems work, or the moralities in like Louisiana versus Ohio versus Wisconsin, like,
Mhm.
there's relativity to the world, and it's only been through travel, and like that's the thing. That's the thing that sort of like sparked the flag for me. It's
Yeah.
like that's what travel does and exposure to the world does is give you this sense that like oh I'm not alone
Yeah.
and I have a strong view of the world. I believe in my view of the world. But when I was 21 years old and was in Trinidad and was the only one of two white guys in the yard, where the particular culture that I grew up in, the ecosystem that I worked in, didn't like the key and the lock didn't fit together naturally, and I had to sort of in that moment be like, how do I do this? And then sort of like try different keys. In those 3 weeks I was in Trinidad, I was just like trying different keys. And
Mhm.
finally one unlocked and a gentleman behind me wearing like Black Panther fatigues. Like, I'm 21. I don't know what the fuck racism is. Like I
Sure.
don't know what any of this shit is. And he's talking to me about, Huey Newton and Malcolm X and all these people. And I'm just like, cool. Like I'm playing double seconds.
Right.
And but at that moment, I was like, oh, like my ideology isn't the only one, and
Well,
I don't know how to interface with that. But like for you, like what, I don't know, like has that collision of the older you get, what are some of the ideologies maybe from young Ben Walland that now, like the older you are, that you're sort of maybe actually believe in, like, yeah, 19-year-old Ben was right. I'm
sure.
right on that. Or what are some things that you sort of like teased out and been like, oh shit, I need to think
Yeah.
about this a little differently.
Oh, I hear you. Yeah, I've wondered if this is just what it is to be in our 40s, is to like when you start doing those weird games of like, oh, gee, when my uncle was this age, he had done blank,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
like, wow, when I was, 7, my dad was this old or something like that,
Hmm.
um, at a young age, I feel pretty. It's a mixed bag to kind of weigh what it was to be away from my grandparents as much as we were. But when we were with them, because we moved around, it was once every couple of years. It
Right.
felt precious.
Mm.
Unfortunately, my grandparents on my dad's side, I never got to meet. They had passed away when I was particularly young. Well, my grandpa before I was born.
Hmm.
And but on my mom's side, it was an every couple of years thing. And the small town we lived in Germany, we were really fortunate that there was a husband and wife who were our landlords who kind of took us in like grandchildren, and they were really cool. They were super generous, both with their time, but like with their spirit.
Mm.
And so they didn't treat my brother and me like anomalies or anything. Like they were just super hospitable.
Hmm.
And I guess one thing that I carried with me is this idea that like old people are actually cool. And it took a long time to finally put words to that.
Yeah.
And as I've gotten older and I've met so many amazing mentors, like I think I kind of traced that back to uh, one of the cool kind of crossing of paths that happened when we didn't live near our grandparents. Yeah. So
That's one of my greatest regrets, I think. The moment you mentioned your grandparents, I was like, fuck, I'm going to have to. Shit. Thanks, Ben. Now I'm going to have to own up to my own. Like, the regrets I have in life, they're few, actually. Like, when my darkest moments, I regret a lot. But in my most lucid moments, I'm like, I wish I would have asked my grandpa, Don, about his time in Bremen, Germany.
yeah. Well,
Like, because I played a concerto in Bremen with the orchestra there,
oh,
and he was fighting the Nazis,
sure.
so this is like 2 people ago. And we're in the same town, and he's fighting the Nazis, and I'm fighting David Lang.
Yeah.
And so like those. That's the regret. He's gone. I'll never be able to ask him. I'll never be able to ask my grandmother what it was like to worry about my grandpa.
Well, and I think,
Like that shit's
oh gosh,
important, man.
yeah, but I think that's absolutely part of the human condition. As we get older and hopefully our wisdom kind of becomes a little more clarified.
Hmm.
Of course, there's going to be certain aspects of regret about our childhood. I would hope, like, otherwise you're
Hmm.
just an overgrown 15-year-old.
Yeah.
So I think there's space for that.
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you something I regret is I went back and visited them in 1998. My jazz band that I was in undergrad, we went and played the Montreux Jazz Festival, and
Whoa.
I got to spend like a week by myself after they went home, and I went back and kind of toured my childhood home area around there, and something really embarrassing happened. Like here I was like 21, right? And our hosts, the grandfather, if you will, who had been our landlords, he and I were alone one day, and he said, "So, what were you thinking you'd like to do in Germany?" And I have these how these memories you have of childhood, you don't quite know what you remember of them. Do you know, like they start getting fuzzy the older you
Mm,
get.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I remember we went to a concentration camp when I was a kid. Like I
Wow.
was maybe all of like 7, I think it was Dachau, and I wanted to go see Dachau just to like kind of like get right in my head about what I actually took in.
Hmm.
And his face kind of dropped a little, and it dawned on me that here's this guy who was a kid during World War II,
Mm-hmm.
and he had told me his memories of World War II were being in a shelter and hearing bombs go off above the shelter and hearing his town get decimated. So even this guy, a generation away from me, was a kid who wasn't an adult during that.
Mm-hmm.
And for
Mm-hmm.
him, it was a completely different experience as a German than what our Time Life series on World War II would tell us, And
Right.
and what was kind of hurtful for me was just seeing this look in his face. And he said, "So you like history?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, let me take you to some Roman bathhouses that are near the town." And while we went there, he started lecturing me all about Franconian history and like what it was and the Germanic Empire and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And he politely redirected this big misstep on my part where like I wanted to talk about Nazis. I wanted to go to the rally fields in Nuremberg and stuff.
The most obvious stuff.
Yeah, and he's firing back. It's like, that was just that was a pretty awful chapter in our history. We have other things going for us. And
Mm-hmm.
then when you think about like some of the amazing heritage of Germany, like yeah, and it does give me a little bit of hope for where the United States is right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like in some ways, it helps me frame it as growing pains. Like I'd like to think that we can figure this out, because
Yeah.
it's a scary time, I think, for a lot of people. But I imagine a lot of very old countries have seen things like this.
Yeah, it's one of the things as an American, like this is growing up, you hear the term American exceptionalism, or the
Yeah.
shining city upon a hill, and you sort of you're made to feel. I don't know. I studied American history, and you think about 1776. That was 150 some odd years ago, or whatever it was, like
Yeah.
200 years ago, or whatever. I'm terrible with dates, so please forgive my math, but
No
like
worries. Yeah.
and it feels like that was like 8 TV shows ago.
Sure.
You know, you're like that was Archie Bunker, and we are now in Seinfeld. Like this is the Americans. Like no, that was an old TV show. It's like no. Actually, like that was maybe think about that as like 75,000 days ago
Yeah.
instead of 175 years ago. Like this is this is a continuation. And oh wow, it turns out that our empire is only 200 and some odd years old. The Greeks and the Romans had like a couple grand. Like
Sure.
holy shit! Like we don't know anything. And like when you and anyway, just to say, like when you put it in context of other countries, like we're not that much different. We're having a similar struggle. There's human beings are trying to figure things out, and it's just anyway. It's I don't have a good question here, Ben, but it's leading me to my next question, which was to sort of divert us from the sort of political abyss that we're all heading towards. But like,
Well,
I'm
could I
sorry. Go
actually take
ahead.
this moment just to chime in on something I've
Yeah.
heard you say before that I suspect maybe some listeners might benefit from.
Mm,
Uh, I was thinking of this hearing when you had asked about what it was to move around a lot and
mm-hmm.
how it kind of frames our idea of things in adulthood.
Yeah.
You've made mention before of Ohio and what it was to be a kid in Ohio
Yeah.
and how you know people who are watching people right now and who are kind of struggling with
Mm-hmm.
what we see on all sorts of aspects of the political spectrum, you know. And
Yeah.
what I can offer up, something that I slowly came to see that I'm really excited about, is that there's absolutely wisdom to be found in the strangest of places.
Mm-hmm.
And just because someone might have nasty looking clothes or a funky job or a goofy accent, like that's absolutely no reason for them not to be intelligent, right? You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I know there's plenty of people all over different political spectrums that are incredibly smart that I just disagree with. And
Yeah.
I also have very strong feelings and thoughts, you know, politically speaking.
Yep.
And I struggle with, well, just how toxic people have gotten about it. Because kids are watching. There are 12-year-olds watching this behavior, reading this behavior,
Yeah.
and we can do it better. Like, I'm okay with us disagreeing. I'm not okay with people being so awful with each other. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree with you. And that's been, I mean, if anybody knows me and has been following me at all on social media, like
Right.
that, you know, I want a big tent. I'd rather have 1,000 flawed friends than 2 perfect ones. And
Yeah.
I feel like the older I get, the more that I work my way through emotionally what it was like to, you know, through the Trump presidency. Like I honestly thought like the Trump administration was going to break me from the idea that I wanted to, you know, commune with people who are different from me. And it was like actually it hardened my resolve for wanting to be with people other than me.
Yeah.
And it actually made me realize that the people who I thought were more like me, like the Caribbean community that I work with in Brooklyn in the steel band world, like the more you spend time with people, the more you realize like you get to the different levels of nuance, like the different geological layers. Like once you drill, if you're willing to drill a mile deep rather than a mile wide,
Hmm.
you're going to find that like, oh wow, you mean these are people too?
Right.
You mean their views on, you know, liberal politics or abortion or gay rights or LGBTQ rights or trans rights? Like all of this stuff is nuanced too, even within the monolithic black community or the monolithic Latino community or the monolithic white community.
Right.
Are you fucking kidding me? Like, I'm sorry. Yes, Jews have views on Palestine and Israel, but I'll bet if you drill down deeper, you're going to find a lot more nuance and a lot more confusion than you find on the surface.
Yeah.
And that to me has, over the last 5 or 6 years, has been the biggest disappointment in my colleagues. Not I don't want to say like my colleagues and so, but just like the community that I'm swimming in the
Yeah.
most. Like I have a lot of fear. I'm terrified of them because I'm like, oh, you don't actually. Not only do you not have the drills to drill deeper, you actively don't want to acquire the drills. Like, that is the thing. Like, that's more terrifying than not having the drills. Is like you don't actually have any interest in getting a few inches deeper below the crust of what it is that's causing these issues. And so anyway, long story short, that's been my biggest beef. You know.
But yeah, for me, sometimes. Well, first of all, I mean, what you're talking about feels a lot like, I don't know, a sad part of the human condition when it, like when
Yeah.
people haven't really had a good opportunity to explore challenging, personalities or ideas and stuff. But of course, the social media echo chamber just galvanizes that for people so much, and that's where I kind of wish I could run around hugging everyone and just be like, settle down, it's okay. Don't spend more than 15 minutes. Like, like,
Don't read the comments. Don't read the comments. Don't respond to the comments. Like, just
well, and I think we're both of a certain age where we saw the internet come to be. And I don't know about you. I didn't see this coming, like funny enough, I felt like I saw Donald Trump coming, because if it wasn't Donald Trump, it just as easily could have been some other stand-in. Like, he's just particularly good at it. And if we weren't to have gotten him 5 years ago, we maybe would have gotten him another 5 years. That feels like something that was created, and we are going to have to contend with that as a civilization. But to me, what's even a little more overwhelming is the social media ecosystem. And it feels like this big growing pain of humanity in general. Like, our brains just aren't wired for this yet. And this is where I am really intrigued to see where it's going to be in 50 years. Like, are there going to be labels on computers like we used to have for cigarettes and stuff? I wonder if, like, in a decade, people are going to be like, I can't believe I let my kid have a TikTok account.
I think this is one of the things that is the arrogance of relevance. Like relevance may be the wrong word, but like human beings who are alive right now, you and I feel like we are relevant. What we have to say and do and our experience is what matters in the world right now, right? Like, but you know what? That relevance, that exact same emotional feeling that you and I are having about whether it be like how to teach steel pan or how to arrange for the double seconds versus the guitar, like that confidence you have is the same exact feeling people in 1801 had about not ending the slave trade.
Yes.
And not because, and again, like, to be clear, not because people then were like, oh, slavery's bad, we should end it, or slavery's great, we should keep it for the economy. It was just like, it was a thing at that time that very few people were actually pissed off about. Pissed off about, to the point where we're going to change policy, where we're going to go, it was a societal norm.
Yeah.
And Facebook and Instagram, I have to be very careful here. And I immediately regret everything I just said of like, I'm going to get canceled. But like, I'm sorry. The way slavery was viewed in the 1700s, early 1800s is not much different than the way Facebook is looked. Oh, it's just part of society. Yeah, there's some things like, yeah, you got your sugar with your tea, but slavery brought you the sugar for your tea, but tea, like, everybody drinks tea, right? Everybody wants sugar in their tea. So, why would we end this thing? Everybody wants to wake up and be like, look at my new Facebook. Look at all the likes I got. But why would we get rid of that? That's a bad comparison. So please, God, disarm everything or tease out everything I just said.
Well, if maybe we could pick it up at like the invention of the cotton gin or something,
yes,
like
please.
From there. Well, and the reason why I'm talking about it is like, because to me, well, first of all, yeah, slavery clearly awful, but an entire country, and not just the United States, but all sorts of civilizations through. Well, I mean, it's like the pyramids, right?
And I mean, it's okay. I don't want to say it's okay. I don't want to be dismissive of it, but I think it's really crucially important when we study history to look at the way stuff was seen contextually. Like the Salem witch trials. At the time, nobody thought what was going on was crazy.
Well, and that's where I'm going. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
I mean, like that's the point.
well, and I think about how there was a time when people were scared of printed texts. There was a
Yes.
time when people were scared of, well, basically the entire Industrial Revolution,
Mhm.
and of course that spawned things like sweatshops and things of that nature. Like we've had these times of growing pains that always seem to coincide with new technology,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and I've wondered sometimes if the technology wasn't there, if slave trade still would have been happening.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know. I mean, I can't speak intelligently about that, but maybe I should start reading on it, I guess.
If there's
But
any book, there's one book called "Bury the Chains" by Adam Hawkschild that was recommended to me by Andy Narell. I did a podcast. I did a series of podcasts with Andy
I heard them, yeah.
during the quarantine, and
Dude,
it was.
I lost a job because of him.
Oh my God! I'm so sorry. Well,
No,
take it
no,
up.
no. When I said it was Subway, I was a high school kid working at Subway,
Oh
and
well,
and I
then.
was complaining to a coworker that Andy Narell was in town,
Mhm.
and I was like really pouty about it all night. And she told our manager, and the manager just called me up the next day and said, "So I heard you were complaining all night about having to work at Subway."
Well, Ben, I will
Yeah.
say, let me just. I could regret this. I think it was worth it. Andy was right. You were right about to complain about that job, but Andy, I did a bunch of podcasts with Andy where he talked about bunched about the sort of contextual history of Calypso and steel band and Trinidad. But Bury the Chains talks a lot about the sort of advocacy around the ending of the British slave trade in England
Yeah.
and around it was like 40 or 50 years of like 12 people meeting in a back room being like, all right, we're going to do it. And then the American Revolution happens like across the ocean and they're like, okay, we're going to have to hold off for like 6 years. Just pause. And it's like
Sure.
they put the whole ending of the British slave trade on pause over like a meeting over 12 people to be like, okay, we just got to hold off for a second. Like
Wow. Yeah.
like it just the nickel and like the day-to-day nickel and dime tour of how this stuff happens is way more interesting and way more convoluted than I think people want to admit. And
Well, and it's way bigger than social media posts,
yes, yeah.
and it's so messy, but it's also so much more powerful that way too.
Hmm. Hmm.
I remember. Do you remember when Andy Narell had posted all of these books that he had read?
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Hmm.
don't. Do you remember this at all? It was like a list of something
Vaguely,
like
yep.
40 books or something like that, and I remember just kind of seeing that list and thinking like, man, I have so much work to do,
Hmm.
And I do remember this title, and when you're talking about that and like slave trade in the UK at large, I was reminded of one of the books I read last year. That oh gosh, I'm so horrible with titles. Is it Why I Don't Talk to White People About Race Anymore?
I don't know that book.
What's so delightful about that book and super challenging is a lot of what informed the history of that book was racism in Great Britain. So
Mm-hmm.
specifically, so like there would be mention of riots, and I
Mm-hmm.
realized when I was reading this that I didn't know because we have like 40 years of storytelling that we wrestle with when it comes to something like a BLM narrative in the last year and a half,
Mm-hmm.
and like I feel this tugging of like compliance, like I'm supposed to believe this and think that because I respect people,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
then to hear a whole nother chapter of the history of racism in Great Britain, like it floored me. It was really challenging to think, wow, I have so many preconceived notions about things that I understood, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned Malcolm X earlier, and it's like, oh yeah, I saw the Denzel Washington movie forever ago,
Yeah.
or like, and that's nowhere close to what two white guys in their 40s need to understand about Malcolm X, right? And the reason why I'm talking about that is I've um, I know a lot of what transpired in the last year and a half for me has given me a lot of pause to just to shut up and do homework. As much as I wanted to say a bunch of things, it was super important to listen and actually watch, and to take in so much of what people had been sharing and still do. And I feel really grateful for some really engaged students who, um, though though we don't find ourselves talking about it, I'm absolutely taking in their digital footprint, and really floored by a lot of the ideas they're sharing, because I didn't see that from a lot of my classmates when I was their age.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this last year and a half has been. I mean, I've had a lot of guilt about it. I mean, I work with the Brooklyn Steel Band community on a regular basis. For me, a lot of the stuff around how to deal with race, and particular how to interact with sorry, there's not a better, how to interact with black people. I'm sorry, I wish there was a more elegant way to put it, but that was if I was going to paint with a broad brush, that was the sort of general vibe over the last year and a half, is what do black people want? What is it that, listen, they're telling us, right? And but what I was seeing online was 95% white people telling me what black people wanted.
Well,
And I had a real hard time with that. I had a real hard time because I was hearing different private conversations from my colleagues that I was working with on a daily basis, who were telling me things like, we need access, we don't know how to apply for grants. We don't know how to run QuickBooks. What's QuickBooks?
Wow. Yeah.
We don't know, or just, well, what's commissioning?
Mm-hmm.
What's presenting a concert? What's a profit and loss statement? And I'm not saying this to be elitist or anything, but those are the barriers that So Percussion has surpassed. The four of us in So, in the sense of we know how to run QuickBooks.
Oh, I see.
Why?
Okay. Yeah.
Because culturally it's just been in our ecosystem longer.
Yeah.
I had to learn it by rote. I mean, I learned it by myself, but it was because someone else told me to learn it, and I just figured it out. But now I'm working with a bunch of steel bands who are, 90 to 140 players a piece in Brooklyn, of ages from 6 to 76, who have zero idea what QuickBooks is. Yet, when I'm online, the thing to do is to say, this is what you need to be advocating for. And to advocate for, financial literacy or these other things is racist. And I'm like, hold up a second, bitch, I've been hearing these conversations for a decade, and now a bunch of white people are telling me that this is the way to talk. This is the way. And for me, for a year and a half, I just felt really confused. I was hearing two different conversations, and but calling balls and strikes, one was more powerful than the other.
Mm-hmm.
My white colleagues had more power in that conversation in terms of social media than the young kids I was working with on a daily basis, who are like, where's middle C?
Yeah.
How do I read a treble clef? Because that's the way to then publish your music, to then have your music played by, the University of Akron in Ohio, to then have your piece. Then you've got a work sample of the University of Akron playing your piece, and then you can apply for a Chamber Music America grant. But right now, unfortunately, the economy is set up so that Ben Wahlund can apply for grants, because Ben Wahlund has 1 million performances of his music out there. And this is no knock on you, Ben. It's just the truth.
I hear you. And
it's just that's the field I'm seeing in front of me. So I guess my larger question is what do we, without taking away how great you are, which is why I'm talking to you. I love your music. I've only seen it a few times in person, but this guy's a fucking beast. Boom,
thanks.
box checked, in the same way that it's checked for me with Kendall Williams or Jerry Ann Williams or any of these other folks I work with. From your standpoint, and I know you have some questions for me too for this podcast, so we've already taken 47 minutes of your life, but Ben,
I'm gonna have to be one of those 3 podcast guests, I think.
what do you see? What do you see in terms of steel band stuff, in terms of how we deal and help with that ecosystem? What do you see as the first couple steps?
Well, for starters, I think I'm nowhere close to being the person to be an authority on that, And before I even have that conversation, because I do have some thoughts about it that really kind of resonate with me, and I'd like to think with some people I really love and respect. I I should say I don't fancy myself as an authority on pan much at all, right? I'm a dude who happens to like steel pan, and I have spent the majority of my career as a percussion educator who happens to compose. I kind of consider myself not necessarily a composer, but just a guy who composes. And to be fair, I consider David Lang a composer. Do you know what I'm saying? Steve Rush is a composer. So
Ben,
for me,
and I think David and Steve would both look at you and be like, "You, sir, are a composer, whether you like it or not. That's what you're called now."
And one of the hard things about having done compositions is like you have tangible evidence of 20 years ago I wrote this piece or that piece. Like when I think of some of my early stuff that I wrote for Steel Band, I'm not crazy about it,
Well, it's it makes you wonder, you see, we have History Channel documentaries of people with paintbrushes being like Tutankhamun's tomb.
Well, sure.
What if the artists in Tutankhamun's tomb were like, no, go over here, go over there. That's where the good shit is.
Well, and this is why I'm so grateful to have had people in my life at really pivotal points who were just really decent to me. And I think when I look at some stuff that I have published from 2000, I was 22, and I was literally just sitting in front of a computer oh, it'd be so cool if Pan did this. It would be so neat if this. And then early 20-year-old Ben, who was I'm going to send this to a publisher and see what happens, and one of whom wrote me back and said, "Hey, you have some promise. I don't know that I'd like to publish this." And then the next guy was, "No, let's go," his name escapes me right now because he's a pianist and he was really classy about it. Anyway, he went so far as to full on give me a composition lesson through an email. He was awesome. The whole thing seems like one big introduction. You might want to consider this, and you might want to consider that. And it was the coolest rejection letter I ever got. But sure enough, all of a sudden these things went to print, but of course that's just what it is as you get older to have done projects, right? Is to look back and be okay, well, I'm glad to think that I would be doing it differently now. So. There's that. And when I studied pan in college, it was in North Dakota. I was going to a private Catholic school in North Dakota, and those North Dakota sokas are a little different than in Trinidad,
But that's okay. I mean, that's something too that I've sort of had to tease out over my. I went to Trinidad in 2015 to see the ICP competition. You hear a band from Japan, a Japanese soka is way different than a Trinidadian soka.
Sure.
But the audience in Trinidad went fucking berserk when they got done. It's all the same. It all works and it's all okay. That's the North Dakota soca. That's what it is. That's fine.
I'll tell you, it floored me. I remember the first time I heard a steel pan ensemble. I remember the piece. I remember the room. I remember everything about the day, and it was awesome. It was a whole new arena of percussion that I had always assumed was something other than what it is, And when I first heard it, I thought, oh, I so need to hear it play these ideas in my head, And by the time I arrived at NIU as a grad student, about a decade later, is when I met Cliff and I met Liam, and they were nothing but supportive to this mediocre voice who came from North Dakota. They were just sure, let's play these arrangements, And before long, I was conducting. I remember because I was a classmate of Yuko's, and she and I are good friends. And I think when she was a grad student, she had done an arrangement of Havanas, for this, and she needed a conductor. And I had just come off of teaching middle school, so I had my conducting chops sort of.
You're
where they needed
I
to be.
have a King David baton. I can conduct.
Well, sure, Well, and it was just this lab for messy ideas. And there's been
Perfect.
so many times now where I've been so grateful for Pan as a voice in my percussion headspace. And I'm humbled that it wasn't informed by what some people might consider a legitimate kind of through line, because I do remember being in the arena of groups like the name of our local awesome steel band was Tropical Ice in North Dakota. Cliff always called them yellow bird bands, So for Liam to hear me working on a thing and say, "Hey, I would love for you to write for me sometime," it floored me, and I realized even then that I was coming from a much different place. My God, I mean, can you imagine what it was like to show up at NIU? My first engagement there as a grad student, Cliff, he handed me a shirt and he said, "Hey, we have a gig next week at Carifet, which is this festival of all things Trinbagonian in downtown Chicago. And we're going to play Pan 2000. We're going to play this." And he just listed off all this rep that they had just got done doing, oh gosh, on one of their tours. I don't know if it was Seoul at the time or if it was or Taiwan. So all these people were just like at 11. And I could barely read and play at the same time. And I was literally up in my office crying as a grad student, and classes hadn't even started yet, So when I think about the Pan community, as someone who's never been to Trinidad and Tobago, but who has met, a couple dozen people from there, in large part just because I'm grateful enough to get to visit with many of them, and these days even teach them now at NIU. I get certain impressions, but everything I've seen from the Pan community, a good 80% of it was informed by Cliff and Liam, because I didn't go searching. Like I told you earlier, there isn't this thing in me that wants to go to Trinidad and Tobago. Like I even had an opportunity once and kind of shied away from it. And that by no means is that because I don't care about that legacy. It's an incredibly rich legacy that I know I'll probably never fully understand. But if we want to talk about legacy, Cliff was nothing but supportive of me, and he never asked me to be anything other than what I was. And he would come to concerts of steel bands that I was directing in Illinois, or percussion ensembles that had pans written in them, and he never poo-pooed it. He would have been entirely it would have been entirely fine if he did, but he never once said, anything bad, really. He was just really, really cool. And he got himself easily to like a dozen of my high school percussion ensemble concerts. And he was just such a class act about it. And I think it's in large part because of some of my work with Robert Chappell, too, who had been doing a lot of work with Liam at the time. He and I've talked plenty of times about how if Pan is going to be in percussion ensemble, it shouldn't just be doubling a xylo line, And to me, one of my favorite voices in percussion is cello Pan, and I love it. It's like this really mutant low register vibraphone, and I just can't get enough of it. But how do you look at someone who's spent their life, for lack of a word, indoctrinated in pan culture and say this is like a mutant vibraphone? It comes off woefully offensive, when it's something that I'm crazy about. I love it. I don't know if that is making any sense.
No, it does. It's. I mean, did you ever say that to Cliff or Liam and have them sort of recoil a little bit when you said it?
No.
Because I'll bet they weren't actually offended.
Well, and this is where where it's just me imagining the Pan community outside of everyone I've known, because everyone I've known in the NIU community of Pan has been, how can I put it, very quick to talk about Pan legacy, very quick to talk the history. Like I have the speech memorized from our run out gigs, like this is the steel pan, 50-gallon oil drum, but then also I have these great memories of like, this is a Jit Samurai arrangement. This is Lord Kitchener. You got to know these names. And that's what that is. So before people are playing Havanas, they're absolutely learning all about Bugsy or something like that. So to me, the pan community I've known has been very, very quick to embrace all sorts of different personalities, all sorts of different voices, all sorts of different ideas. And it's awesome to see, just characters like a Jonathan Scales or characters like, have you met Darren Roberts yet? Like,
I haven't, no.
Oh, he's savage. But then like Darren, he can turn around and just shred on drum set, and I guess what I mean by this is my experience with the pan community doesn't seem to align from what I've seen from the pan community at large outside of NIU. And I'm afraid that if I offer any commentary on that outside of church, it might, I might just be speaking out of my ass, really.
Well, I would say
because everything I see, again, makes me feel like it's part of the human condition. And it's such a tight-knit group of people who are so incredibly invested in it and its legacy that the very different personalities that inform that community, that's already really raw,
Well, I mean, I'm looking behind you and I see I see 4 beautiful snare drums.
Oh.
I see a deep snare drum. I see a slightly deeper, a thinner, and then the thinnest snare drum. Like, snare drum culture, I mean, I don't know the history, but I'm just going to guess culturally comes from a place not so dissimilar from the steel drum in terms of its origins and what it was used for, and culturally, like different things culturally, but in terms of its origins, it had a place in a thing. Some places in the world it was with the military. Some places in the world it was with French resistance. Some places in the world it was whatever, and for me, when I look at how I'm clocking the percussion world, like if I just had to put pins on a board of like, all right, this is happening here, like the snare drum is like way to the left. Like we know about the snare drum now. We're gonna study it. There's books now, and god damn it, you're gonna learn De La Cluse 1 and 9 at bare minimum. I don't know about 2 through 7, but 1 and 9, you're gonna learn those, right? In steel drums, I feel like I'm now becoming aware that I'm really grateful that I'm in this point where steel drums are still connected culturally to, like, the snare drum is now removed. The violin is now removed from its cultural bedrock, right? In a way that when you go to see the LA Phil play, you're not looking at a band of folk musicians. You're looking at like people who have studied at Juilliard and Curtis and all these other places, right? The steel drum is still in that early stage where we've got people like Bugsy Sharp and Ray Holman and Andy Norell, and like these are people. It's still becoming a thing, and I'm really grateful, oddly, for the sort of ambiguity that comes from this time that we're in, where like,
I'm so with you.
We're trying to figure out who invented the instrument, for fuck's sake. Like, I did a million educational shows where I'm like, Spree Simon and Thick Lip Bartholomew and like all these things, these stories I heard, and now I'm like, I read Kim Johnson's book, From Tin Pan to Taspo, right. I read The Illustrated Story of Pan, and I'm like, fuck, I left out like 75 people in every assembly I gave to second graders, as a college kid. And so, like, I'm very grateful to be in that point right now, actually.
But it does, it makes me wonder, well, I see this sometimes in the percussion community at large, too. Like, it feels like the scarcity mentality where a lot of people are really eager to lay claim to things because they're scared that if other people do, that somehow it'll get away from them, And I'm by no means am I suggesting that's just in the pan community, but I've certainly seen it in all sorts of parts of what it is just to be a person, like this one guy who really wants to coach the little league team, and the next dad over is actually a better coach, and And I think one of these wild things about where Pan is right now is there's this free flow of information that violin didn't get when it was this age, right? Uh, I'll tell you really quick. Shortly before this, I got an email this morning from a percussionist in Japan named Mayumi Ota. I haven't met her, but she's recording a piece that I wrote for one of Liam's. Oh, do you know Malika Green?
Yes, but I don't know why.
Okay, she was
Sorry.
one of Liam's students. About a decade ago, and then she was doing some exceptional work with the CYSO, and
Okay.
then she's, I think, a Fulbright scholar now, and might even be in Trinidad. I might be off on
Okay.
that.
Pardon my ignorance, but
No, it's
I know
cool.
the name, but I'm not exactly sure why.
So I wrote a pan and marimba duet like a decade ago when I was a grad student, and now someone in Japan's recording it on a CD, right? And that's like the other side of the planet. And violin players didn't get that experience, and neither of us were from Trinidad or Tobago, you know. Um, and what makes that tricky for me to kind of wrap my head around is like, yeah, how do people like me engage Pan without feeling like it's somehow, well, cultural appropriation, you know?
Well, okay. Well, let me ask you. When you say people like me, and I'm sort of asking the most obvious question here, but like when you say that, what exactly do you mean when you say people like me?
Oh, how about middle-aged cis white guys? You know, uh, be- well, no. Let's even take it a step further. When I listen to Pan, um, I remember the first time I saw Desperados on a VCR. It was the Dust in the Face show. Did you remember this at all? Like this was at 1997, maybe. And it was like a full-on VCR, and I thought it was extraordinary, right?
Mm.
Um, but to me, just because so much of the percussion experience is about assimilation, it is about collecting as many crazy and exciting sounds as you can to make something beautiful. To me, it's like, yeah, let's throw Pan in the toolbox right next to a flexitone, right next to a marimba, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so while I do think I have a reasonable sense of the heritage that's informed it, there, you were saying it earlier. There's a heritage that informs snare drum too. There's a heritage that informs marimba, vibraphone, like hand pan, right? So, uh, so when I'm writing a piece in four movements that doesn't even touch on Calypsonian ideas, you know, if anything, it maybe leans toward Bach. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm saying when I say people like me writing
Mm-hmm.
for Pan, because I don't claim to have a keen insight on that.
It's
Um,
interesting. I mean, it's one of the things that I think I'm trying to tease out personally. And I mean, I asked the question out of selfishness because I don't know how to answer that. When I say the number of times I've been in conversations with people like Kendall Williams or Jerrion Williams or Odie Franklin or Mark Brooks or, you know, anybody in the Brooklyn, New York scene, you know, panorama scene, when I mention, I'm like, well, I'm just a white guy. Like the swiftness in which that is cut out of my jargon by
oh heck yeah,
them
sure.
is so fast. But in the white community that I'm in, it's like a prerequisite to acknowledge that that's what I am before I can then speak on the thing I've been doing. And that's for me the dissonance where it's like nobody in the steel band community is begging me to confess that I'm white.
Sure.
That I'm from Ohio. I've got a tattoo of Ohio on my wrist. I played, you
Mhm.
know, I've got all these things like I'm born in a cornfield. I still feel an obligation to say that, but the obligation is to my white colleagues, not my black colleagues. Over time, that's the thing that
Sure.
I feel like I'm coming around to believe. And then I have to ask myself, well, why am I saying it?
Yeah.
Who do I actually care enough about appeasing? Actually, I care more about my black colleagues appeasing them. So I'm going to stop saying that I'm white and that I'm a special thing in this community, you know, like as a justification to my white friends. And to me, that's the thing in the last year and a half that I've had a real hard time sort of like teasing out that Gordian knot of like how do we how do I sort of have a foot in both pools at the same time.
Did you ever hear the story about how that is it the Gordian knot gets solved?
No, please tell me. I'd love to solve the Gordian knot.
I might be wrong on this, but is the legend behind that it was like an untiable knot?
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And unless I'm mistaken, I think the legend goes that Alexander the Great, as a child, just took his sword and cut it in half.
I was gonna say, like, that's pretty easy. Like, this is
Yeah.
pre-chainsaw, clearly.
Right. You know? I, and I guess I bring this up because I've known that temptation to do the aw shucks, like the aw shucks thing, like, yeah, no, I dare not dance because, Midwest white guy. But it's clearly from a place of comfort that we can even offer that, right? Because you're right. You're in a pan yard. It's pretty obvious you're white.
Well, it's the only thing. Well, I don't want to include gender into this mix because that is something that is still subjective. But the color of my skin, like that's the thing. That's the most obvious thing about me, and the idea that that's the thing that I have to spend the most time accounting for, to me, is like the most obvious counterintuitive thing about the human experience. Yet my instinct is still to be like, I'm white. Before then, I'm asked by a black Caribbean person to then drill a 140-piece steel band. Like,
Sure.
that act should be enough assurance to me that I then don't have to then cop for my whiteness second. Yet I still do, and that's the frustrating thing for me as a person, that I'm still trying to figure out how, if I can cleave that part out of my humanity, I feel like I might be faster, quicker. I might be a better version of myself. All of those things.
I know this is normally when you sign off. This does bring us to. I think I had something like 14 questions for you, none of which
Yes,
we hit.
please, and you can please go ahead. Let's go to that because it's more interesting, maybe.
Well, no. This does bring me to something that I've been excited to talk with you about.
Yeah.
That I've found to be very helpful for me as well. That I really wish I could just like sprinkle a gift to so many people I know and love in the music community, but especially the percussion community, because we keep dipping our toes into some really challenging cultural situations. What it is that has you feeling like you need to say these things, right? What I can tell you is I don't feel that way, though I've had it in my head. Right. But that's manifested not so much in the pan side of things, but on the drum set side of things. Like, I like to think I can throw down on kit. I enjoy it. I've done plenty of hours on it. Right. But when I showed up in Chicago and was just schooled like hard by a lot of drum set guys out here, many of whom were not white, there was a part of me was like, wow, am I just not as good as them because I'm white? And I realized, no, it's because they practiced way harder than me.
They have tendons and muscles just like you do, and they've just worked them more.
And it was embarrassing that I spent a good chunk of my grad school experience like trying to be like, man, why don't I groove as hard as these jazz studies majors? Like, oh, because they're jazz studies majors. Like, that's what they do. And I offer this up because I feel like sometimes these really rich conversations that people can enjoy in communities never quite happen because we're so scared of either being hurt or hurting one another. Yeah. In large part because we don't invest in our life outside of our career all that much as a percussion community at large. That kind of hustle and grind mentality that so many young percussionists have, it takes a lot to trust that it's okay to spend a Saturday afternoon, hanging out at the local Apple Fest or something like that, Right. And it has me thinking how helpful it's been for me to have certain friends who kind of don't care about my percussion career, or a wife who herself isn't a musician and So like, oh gosh, let me think. So I'm like really amped about a PASIC performance that I have coming up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a collection of 12 marimba solos that I wrote, and I have 12 Yamaha artists taking the stage with me, and we're all just going to play a whole bunch of band compositions that I wrote in
Awesome.
an artist residency in Key West.
That's great.
And my wife said something to the effect of, "Oh," and I said, "Hey, do you want to come to PASIC and hear me?" And she said, "Is it that same recital you did 2 years ago?" I said, "Yeah," and she's like, uh, well, there's a dog show that weekend." You know?
Do you want to know who else's wife will never come to a PASIC other than my wife?
Who's that?
Her name is Bonnie Hartzenberger. She's
Sure.
married to Russell Hartzenberger, and Russell and Bonnie are two of my favorite people in the world. But she came to one, and she was like, "Oh no,
Sure. Well, and
like,
this is
that's
where I'm
okay."
so excited to come to one of the things I would like for your listeners to hear you talk about,
Mm-hmm.
because I've seen some benefits from it. About 5 years ago, when I was just full on way too busy, oh gosh, I was teaching at two colleges. I was teaching at two high schools. I had like 60 private students at the time, and I was directing the Chicago Youth Symphony Percussion Group and heading up a camp, like a 2-week percussion camp in the summers.
Mm-hmm.
I went and saw a therapist, and I found it to be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And even as recently as this last spring, I found myself kind of like dreading just the state of affairs on the planet at large, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I found it really helpful to go back to that therapist. You've mentioned therapy before.
Mm-hmm.
Would you feel comfortable talking about it a little bit? I'm
Sure.
not like, we don't need to hear about your therapy, but just therapy in general.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, before I realized what therapy was, I started a podcast.
Yeah.
Like, I think I always knew that talking to other people was important to me personally for my own personal health. When my dad died in 2009,
Yeah.
and I think for a long time I didn't. I was having anxiety. I was having panic attacks. I was terrified of dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, which is what my dad died of. Like, but I'm 20, whatever it is, 29 years old. Like, I wasn't able to deal with it rationally. And then finally, my wife was like, I can't be your therapist. I'm your wife. Like, I love you, and I want to watch like Seinfeld and
Yeah.
laugh and then go to bed. And like, I can't be the person you're complaining about your dad or your career or whatever to every day. And that was a hard moment. And I was finally like, fuck, okay, I need to go talk to somebody. And so I started, I bounced around to a few different therapists until I finally got to somebody that was like, oh, this is what therapy is.
Yeah.
Where they were literally, legitimately questioning me on everything I thought. And not in a way to make me change my beliefs, but just to shore up why it was I was thinking what I was thinking. And so, I mean, for me, it was nice to go to a third person who didn't know anybody I worked with, didn't know my wife, and didn't know my dad.
Right. They're not role players. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't have a say in what I play on stage at Carnegie Hall or any of these other places. They don't have a say in what we eat at dinner at night. Like, it was just a third person I could go and be like, my wife's a piece of shit, even though I didn't mean it at all. Like, that's just what I needed to say in that moment.
Sure.
And that's what a therapist is for. And then the therapist can be like, well, why do you feel that way? And I'd be like, well, she said this thing. And then the therapist 20 minutes later finally gets you to admit that your wife's not a piece of shit and that perhaps you're seeing it through this distorted lens that you need to recognize as a distorted lens that you're looking through. And maybe today you can't take that lens off. But the
Hmm.
thing today is just to realize that you have a lens on.
Right.
like
Yeah. No.
like that honestly is like the first, like someone being like, you're actually, when you have a panic attack by reaching to grab your door handle of your car,
Like,
like
that's a thing.
you're you're not panicked about your car exploding. You're panicked about your dad shaking to death in a hospital bed. Those two things are not related, right? Right? And it was like 6 months of somebody being like, right? Until I finally was like, yeah, you're right. Me grabbing my door handle is not the same as, holding my dad while he was shaking to death, of Lou
Yeah.
Gehrig's disease. Like, those aren't the same thing. And so, like, in terms of therapy, whether it have to do with grief, whether it have to do with your own personal struggles with like your grad degree program, whether it have to be with a girlfriend breaking up with you. I'm not saying everybody needs to go to a therapist immediately anytime you're feeling stressed, because again, like I don't want you to waste your money either. If you're like, I don't know, my groceries are too expensive, like that, maybe don't go to your therapist for that. But like, if you're like, for me, it was legitimately a lot of like, I don't want to do what I'm doing anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want to play music. I don't want to be alive. I don't want to be married. I don't want to be in a chamber music group. I don't want to teach steel band. I don't want to travel. I don't like it. There was all these things that were like, this is my life. What do you mean I
Yeah.
don't want to play music? Fuck me. I've been doing this since fifth grade. I'm fucked if I can't do that. And so that was the moment when like I needed to go to talk to a third party who could be like, you've told me this thing, to be like a dramaturg for your life. Not a director, but a dramaturg. Like the dramaturg tells you, hey, you've told me that this is the point of your story. Here's where you're going. It's actually counter to what you've told me you want to do.
Yeah.
Is that what you want to do? And then I can be like, well, shit, no, that's not at all what I was thinking. I need to go back towards this thing and maybe be okay with a little bit of the personality issues that I have with Jason, for example, and so percussion for over 15 years. And he's certainly got with me,
Oh.
and like, oh, okay, maybe, oh, actually, if I'm okay with that, then that makes this other thing way easier,
Yeah.
and that's now 15 years into it. So anyway, to answer your question in a very long about way, I, I I don't think it's ever bad for somebody to go to a third objective party and be like, I feel like a piece of shit and
Yeah.
I'm terrible and I feel like I'm the worst person in the world. Like, that's okay. Go do that to a third person. Don't do it to your chamber music partner. Don't do it to
Sure.
the person you're trying to learn Ben Wallen's percussion quartet with. Do it with like a court or like a mandated like therapist, somebody who knows how to do it, because that's in the same way you go for a head cold or you've got the flu or you're pissing blood. Like for me, when I wake up and I feel like I don't want to go to so percussion anymore, that's the equivalent of me pissing out blood. And what I need to do is call my therapist and be like, I don't want to play music. And she could be like, well, you realize music is awesome, right? And like that's the back and forth that I feel like a therapist. I can't do that with my wife. If I go with my wife now, I go, I don't want to play music anymore. And she's like, well, quit.
Right.
Like that's not what I want. I don't need that right now. I need to hear a therapist be like, you should think long and hard about what it is you're doing.
I'm sorry if you hear running water above my head.
It's all right.
Something you mentioned was that you went to a couple of therapists before one worked. I've known a lot of people for whom that's the case, where it's not much unlike a private teacher. Like you might have a couple that are okay, but then one just like sends you to the moon. Yeah. But also that dynamic of like what it is to bring what you're wrestling with to other relationships that otherwise could be really healthy and happy and engaging. You know what I mean?
There are things that I won't say here. I'm generally a very open person. Like I'm a warts and all sort of guy. There are about two things in the world that I've told my therapist and I've told my wife and I haven't told my mom.
Wow.
Like, and I think that's important. I think it's important to have somebody in your life who you can be like, listen,
Totally.
this
Well,
thing happened and I don't know what to do with it.
but it feels like it kind of goes into that territory we were talking about earlier, where I feel like our brain just isn't quite wired yet physiologically to handle some of the stuff that's going on. Because you're right. I think there was a time where we just weren't inundated with so many ideas and thoughts and concerns. So it would make sense that things would just get so intense that we need someone else to help decode what's going on. Uh, and I hear you. I suspect a lot of people have like that real deep thing. I know I have a couple of things that way too. That like you don't dare like share that because you dread the repercussions of like what would happen.
It's like when I think, like, I don't know, let me ask you, like, if when you think of secrets that you've kept from the world for
Yeah,
whatever reason, whether good or bad, or like, you've robbed a bank and you won't tell anybody, like, you don't need to
yeah.
cop to that, but like, can you cop to me the number of things that you've kept from everybody in your life but one or two people?
Let me
You don't
think
need to
about
tell me
that.
what they are, but like just
Oh, sure.
the number of things. Can you think? Because for me,
Yeah, I
there's
can think of
there's
like
there's
two. Well,
two. I can think of two
yeah,
that I know that two or three people in the world know,
yeah,
and
that's where I'm at,
it's important to me.
and I'm glad to say that the people who do know are the people that matter a lot to me. I've gotten to a place where I can trust things. Something I know with my wife, she's a veterinarian, and she has
Mm.
like this crazy intense job because during COVID, she's done a whole lot of house calls where she'll do at home euthanasias, like literally during this call,
No,
she
like
did an at
that.
home euthanasia
Stop,
while we've
Ben.
been podcasting.
Now I'm gonna cry. Stop saying shit like that. Now I gotta go to my therapist, Ben. Thank you.
Well, I'm saying this because like Jen's job is way harder than mine, you know? So a bad day for me looks way different than a bad day for her. And like it's on me to make myself available to her as the best husband I want to be. And I take a certain degree of pride in that, you know?
Mm.
And if it means me going to a therapist so that I'm not like just shoveling all of my like it was so hard because I saw a concentration camp when I was 7. Josh, do you want to hear something messed up? Like really messed up? You'll
Yes.
remember I mentioned that I didn't see many old people.
Yeah.
I honestly believed as a kid for a couple of days that concentration camps were what we did with old people. Like as a kid, I had that thought for a while.
But
Like
there's no
that's
reason you would think otherwise. I mean, just in defense of little Ben Wahlund, like there's no. I mean, I also sat. I sat in the nook of like outside where the fireplace came down to the ground, like
yeah,
the fire stack or whatever. Chimney? It's called a chimney
sure.
in the parlance of our times. Um, my dad, I found a piece of coal. My dad told me that if I just held it tight enough, it'd become a diamond. And then I realized like that's what parents tell their kids when they don't want to babysit them. So like I just sat outside with a piece of coal for like a whole weekend, being like, yes, yes. And my dad was like, oh, I can take a nap. Like
but but I think like what it is to be a person is so much messier than what we see on TV or what
yeah,
we read on social media. And I love that Jen, like, she really wouldn't care if I gave up my music career and decided to go into like the post office and had a job there. Do you know what I mean? Like,
totally.
she loves me, and I just happen to be a music teacher in her eyes, you know.
Yeah.
And when I stress about my career, I take comfort in that. Much like how I wouldn't love her any less if she decided to quit doing such a tough job, you know.
Mm,
But
mm,
what I do know is that we have to work to make space emotionally for each of us at night.
mm,
One of the things that was really hard for me in the last year is I'm quite empathetic when it comes to my students. Like
mm,
when they hurt, I hurt, and when they feel
mm,
joy, I feel joy. You know,
mm.
if there is a big gripe about taking lessons with me, it's just that we talk too much and we don't hit things with sticks enough. You know,
You're an empath. That's what we call you.
well, sure. um, and so when all of my students were hurting last year, that was
Mm,
hard for me. You know, like
yeah.
hard to the point where like it took a toll. Like it was hard for me to want to teach. And strangely enough, when there was like all of these people like jumping online, and it felt like this big creativity land rush going on during
Mm,
COVID, where everyone was doing the next most amazing video with drone footage and awesome lighting and stuff. Like I just didn't have an appetite for it, you
mm-hmm.
know. And I ended up basically going on a whole bunch of these calls with my wife, you know, and seeing people from all over Chicago and all these different suburbs, and all of them are in different stages of grief, you
Mm,
know, and it was such a different kind of way to spend a day than, you know, being
mm.
a music teacher or a composer, right?
Well, it's one of those things. I mean, I think I don't know, like this last year and a half has been hard. The thing that has been the hardest for me too is like it was the one. I don't know. Like I got hoodwinked into thinking this. Like prior to COVID, I walk in the room. I'm the adult. I'm the authority figure. I'm gonna do this thing. You're gonna listen. I'm gonna leave. And then all of a sudden, we're all on Zoom. We're all dealing with the same issue.
Yeah.
Right.
But one of the first times in history for both teachers and students to be experiencing the same thing long term.
Right. Nobody alive has ever had to deal with this. Right. And so we're all trying to negotiate at the same time. All of the issues that were being talked about mental health, depression, I was getting emails from NYU and Princeton all about like taking care of your students' mental health. And I'm like, bitch, I'm about to jump off my roof if I have to teach one more. I love Bugsy Sharp, but if I have to lecture on that motherfucker one more time, I'm going to kill myself.
Sure.
And that was like, September of last year. And I had a whole year to go. And I'm saying that just to admit that I was weak and I was not prepared. I don't think I did a great job. But in that moment, I wasn't allowed to say that I was in the same boat as my students. So I was like, I need them to open their cameras. Like, I'm trying to log on. Can they just not have their names on the screen? Can I see their stupid, silly faces? If I have to show my dumb face, you got to show your dumb face. And so for a year, I literally would log off and be like, I need 4 rum and cokes before I can actually see the world remotely sanely.
Yeah.
And now we're back in person, and there was a little bit of adjustment, but it's like, it's weird. It's like we're not even acknowledging the last year and a half. Like we're back in person. Everybody's like, "This is great." I'm like, "You all had a gun in my mouth for 2 years. Like, can we talk about that for 2 seconds? Jesus Christ!" And I know it wasn't great for you either. But like, come on. Like, let's just say that sucked, right?
I have so many students that handled this the last year and a half so much better than most of the adults I know.
Yeah.
Well, for any number of reasons, but I hear you. And that whole notion of like, it looks normal now, but it's off. Like it makes me think of like Windows safe mode, where, like, not all the functions are quite there.
You're like, you keep clicking on something. You're like, this used to do something, but now it only opens up that one Word doc every time I click on it.
Well, sure. And like, there's only like so much. Yeah. You probably know. Do you know? Yeah, of course you know Greg, my colleague at NIU, Greg Beyer.
Of course.
He's just a beast, right? Like and he and I like we do a lot of thinking and hard work to try to offer the best studio experience we can to the students at NIU. And we like both of us don't have kids, Greg and me, so like it's almost indecent like how much we care about the students at NIU, like so
your poor students are like trying to figure out ways to like help you adopt other kids so you could be like you have another project other than their Scheherazade or their Barenbow solo or whatever.
Right. It's like,
please God, adopt. Can I help you adopt a 23-year-old? It'd be good.
Well, it's crazy because like it's a pretty tight knit group of students, and Greg's very thorough.
Yes, so, I do know that about Greg.
When it came to a culture of COVID, like we tried really hard to stay in front of all health concerns that way. So very appropriately, we'll have students who like they're pretty quick to quarantine themselves if they've come into contact with someone. And so even though our school at large has very specific protocol, there's even kind of like an understood like don't mess around with this type of vibe in the studio. So sure enough, last week or maybe the week before, there was a student who quarantined, who lived with 3 other percussion students who then quarantined. And then like so there was this like kind of chain of kids quarantining themselves in the studio. And then I even got a little spooked because I was thinking like, oh man, I saw this kid for 2 lessons that week. And like, oh my gosh. So I quarantined that weekend, So just just overnight, it felt like this progress that we had just kind of grinded to a slow, and then it got back up and running,
This moment
and everyone's fine, thank goodness, but
this is the moment as a teacher where like I have no hate, and again, like people are gonna be pissed off by hearing this. I have no hate in my heart for like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, But what I wish they would have spent their time was like, it's cool. Like, listen, I want to go to I'd love to go to space.
Sure.
I follow Neil deGrasse Tyson. I listen to that man obsessively. Like, yes, space exploration. But right now, what we needed was a cloth that if you just go, and if it turns green or red, you can walk in a fucking room. That's what we fucking needed. I'm sorry for the bad language. We didn't need a dick-shaped rocket in space. We needed a napkin that when you breathe into it, it turned red or green. Like, and I genuinely think Elon or Jeff could have come up with that. And then you could walk into a room and teach a snare drum lesson with zero worry. But no. We went to space in a dick-shaped rocket. And so here we are teaching, Porgy and Bess and, Booksy Sharp's music while all freaking, having mental breakdowns. But anyway, I don't know what my point was there, Ben, but
you like Neil deGrasse Tyson, yeah.
Yeah, I just go off on random tangents and get really pissed off and wave my hands around. But
do you want to hear a quick Neil deGrasse Tyson
I do. I love that
idea
man.
that has helped me in the last year for some reason?
Yeah, please.
It's a bit of a riddle that I still haven't quite figured out why I take so much comfort in it, but he talks about time travel and and have you heard him ever talk about like the biggest mistake most people make when they're thinking about time travel is they forget that the Earth is moving. So if you don't factor in for where the Earth was in the past, that you're just gonna
you're gonna end up in the middle of the universe just floating.
Well, yeah, and I guess for me, like that's helped me stay in the moment sometimes. Like to think about like the past, it very much is the past. Like when I was comfortable with certain ideas or things that have changed, or when I have regrets, or when I get nervous about the future. Like it helps me stay in the room with students or with people that I love.
Yeah. Well, his phrase too that has brought me solace, and my dogs are going nuts right now, Ben. So I gotta put a pin in this, and we can come back to part 2 because I've already stolen an hour and 34 minutes of your life, and I immediately regret it. So I apologize.
No, it's good.
But it was the idea that the Earth or the universe is under no obligation to make sense to you.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that when I'm teaching steel drums, or I'm teaching music, or I'm teaching phasing in Reich's music, or I'm teaching, how to play drum set in Booksy Sharp's music, I'm like, this is under no obligation to make sense to you right now. It barely makes sense to me as a 42-year-old, and I've been playing it for over 20 years. And it still is now just kind of coming into view. So for you, just fucking chill. You're looking at a kaleidoscope right now. It's going to be great. That's what you're paying for. And that's kind of the thing I feel like I'm trying to come to as a teacher.
Well, I hear you. And I would also offer up, I suggest not just as a teacher, but a dude in his 40s or a husband, right? Mm-hmm. Because I imagine your Lutheran minister wife would say something similar, that God doesn't owe you any explanation.
Well, that's the thing. Like for her, grace is grace. As a Lutheran, right. You get grace, and you don't have to be theological here to agree or disagree, but like in the Lutheran theology, grace is given to you, and there's no explanation.
Yep.
And that's fucking maddening. That's terrifying. That's so infuriating. God damn it! I need a coupon to show that I got these 50 cents off. There's a cause and response. You can't just give me grace. That's ridiculous. Why? I didn't give you anything. And I feel like that's something I've learned from it's taken like 16, almost 20 years now with my wife to be like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, you're right.
Fuck. Why did I fight you for so long?
Well, I'm excited to hear 20 years from now what else you'll learn, because to me, the big riddle is, what does a person do then? Like, what does that compel us to do at that point, Yeah. And I'm grateful that both you and your wife and my wife and me, we get to spend our days doing really uplifting, though challenging things. Like, that's not a bad way to spend our adulthood,
Not at all. And Ben, I am very grateful for your time here. And my policy is the door is always open. And I secretly want to book you as soon as possible because I know you have 13 other questions that you wrote down that I'm very psyched to answer. We got through one of them. But that's okay. Like, and I like developing relations. I like also listeners coming back and hearing you say something then in the second podcast where they're like, oh, I wish he didn't say that. And then they come back for the third podcast and they're like, oh, he redeemed himself. Like that for me is what, human interaction is about. And so I'm grateful for your time here, and I hope you take me up on the second invite whenever you're ready.
Oh, I'd love to.
We'll just pick
One
up where
quick
we
thing:
left off.
we
Yeah.
never even got to talk about the piece that I'm writing for Liam.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Ben.
No worries. No, I bring this up in large part because you would be interested to know. Do you know that break drum that Cliff would play at NIU?
Yes.
Like, does that mean anything to you? Like,
Yes, but more culturally than it does anything else.
oh, sure,
Just
like his actual break drumming, sure. But like, there's a gorgeous break drum there that just over the years of Cliff playing it. So it's a piece for pan and cello. Not cello pan, but like actual cello that Liam's going to be premiering in November.
Awesome.
And I wanted to talk to you about the process of it. So maybe we could talk again before November 6th, specifically because it's wild because I've got like 200 Cliff samples and a whole bunch of Cliff interviews and stuff. And it's been crazy writing this piece for Liam about Cliff. And I was just hoping to unpack it with someone who also knew and loved Cliff, you know.
Okay, just in the interest of my 4 listeners' interest, let's book a second time to just really drill down on that, because if you can send me a score or anything, like I can take a look at it ahead of time. I would love to really just sort of get in there with a hoe and a hoe blade and sort of chew it all up and be like, what's in here?
Sure,
that'd be really fun. Yeah. And you said it's November 6th is the premiere?
Yeah, and Liam's going to be doing a recital at NIU and probably webcasting it. You know? Yeah, he's doing some stuff with Kevin Bobo on that, and another piece that, well, a couple of premieres, you know. So
great.
Yeah, Liam's he's awesome.
You don't need to convince me of that.
I suppose
he's a multinational treasure. We have to share him with Trinidad and Tobago. But let's hook up before then. That'd be great to chat about that stuff. Ben, I've really enjoyed this hour and 40 minutes. I hope you did too, and I hope we got something out of it. I hope people enjoyed it. But I really enjoyed this, and I hope you stay healthy and safe. And in the meantime, I look forward to seeing you again soon. I don't know when that's going to be in person, but maybe at PASIC we should just like keep it traditional, and we just kind of walk by each other and be like. Maybe it might be best if we never see each other in person. That's
well, and I gotta tell you about one of those walk-by conversations sometime when the day is right too, because you pulled me out of a really funky space there for a while. So I know. Yeah, you got dogs you got to go take care of though. It's cool.
Yes, I do. Poor Anya is going to chew my leg off if I don't get feed her. But we'll pick up here where we left off. Ben, thank you so much. Stay healthy, and I will look forward to chatting with you again soon. And please say hello to Greg and Liam for me, and Yuko. Give Yuko a hug. Tell Liam and Greg I love them, but give Yuko a hug.
All right. You got it. All right. Thanks so much. It was really fun.
All right. Take it easy, Ben. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Liquid Drum, liquiddrum.com down in Waco, Texas. My good friend Todd Meehan runs an amazing percussion company down there. Great merch, great content. Check him out, liquiddrum.com. Also, Kyle Dunleavy, dunleavypans.com, DUNLEAVY pans.com. Kyle Dunleavy makes and builds all the steel drums that I perform and teach on, in So Percussion, as well as at NYU and Princeton. He's an amazing tuner builder, just a really nice guy, very dependable. Check him out. If you are interested at all in steel pan advocacy, want to learn more about the goings-on in pan in Brooklyn, check out paninmotion.com. My good friend Kendall Williams, Jerry Guy, Trisha Guy, and Arisha John run an amazing organization called paninmotion.com. Check them out. And finally, Alejandre Mirage runs an amazing clothing apparel company in Brooklyn that is steel pan centric. You can check him out at mangochow, CHOW, clothing.com. I own a bunch of his shirts. They're amazing, very stylish, beautifully made. Check them out. mangochowclothing.com. Okay, hope you're well. Talk to you soon. Bye.